Okay, welcome everyone. I am Megan Mitchell, the founder of Agents of Change. If you are new to the group, can you just put that in the chat if this is your very first time signing on to a study session? I see some new people. That's really exciting. Welcome. We have these study groups 2 times per month. This month, it's actually a really nice breakdown between topics. Our first topic today is going to be elderly and aging clients. And then our second study group of July is going to be working with minors. So we kind of are going to get the whole spread of ages throughout the lifespan. So the way these work is they are always recorded. I go over content usually for a little bit of the time, and then we always end with some discussion, some practice questions. And those practice questions at the end are really to kind of get you thinking about how to break down questions, how to start to use some of the strategies, those types of things that are presented throughout the course. Someone said they're not able to hear me. So if that is the case, what you're going to want to do, if you ever have tech issues, exit out of Zoom, come back in, because Zoom can be very, as we all know, can be very finicky. So welcome. What we're going to do, I'll give you a little bit rundown. I always go over the dashboard and what you should look for on the course platform, so that you kind of get a sense, if you are new to the platform, how to use that. We're going to jump right into aging and elderly, talking about that topic today. A few updates, some stuff that is exciting coming down the pipe for Agents of Change. We will have a community manager starting. So she will be engaging with the Facebook group. She'll be answering emails. She is a social worker in Ohio. So I'm very excited to have her join the team. I'll send a welcome to her soon. And then either next month in August or in September, we are partnering with a nurse practitioner that works on mind-body connection. She's actually, for one of our study groups, going to do some techniques for how to work through test anxiety, how to kind of manage our nerves on test day. So I think that's going to be a really exciting one, because we know a lot about testing, that there's the knowledge base, but we really want to get in connection with the feelings that we're having, the sensations that we're having. So I'm really excited. She does mind-body connection for a living. She's an expert in that. So that will be coming in August or September, and she'll be doing hopefully some videos for us and some blog posts for us too. So I really wanted to bring in that mind-body connection piece as well. So I'm very excited about that as well. So stay tuned for that. Even if you are done with the platform, by then I'm going to obviously open it to anyone, because I think that's just going to be a really nice thing. We all can use some self-care and some techniques to ground. So she actually was a nurse throughout the whole pandemic, so she knows about burnout. She's a burnout coach. So we thought that would be a great partnership, because a lot of us fellow social workers are burnt out as well. So that's exciting stuff coming. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Will you just give me a thumbs up if you can see? It should be the study platform. Great. Okay. Got a few more people joining in, so I'm going to add them now. We will be utilizing the chat function today. So as I'm presenting, if you have any questions or things that you'd like me to answer that are specific to aging and elderly clients, go ahead and do that. But remember that this is your time. So however you engage best, however you learn best, do that tonight. So if it's going to be your more passive learner today, and maybe you're going to go back and watch this video at a later time, if you want to take notes throughout, however it's going to work best for you, you can be either as passive or active as you would like in this, because I know everyone is different. So I will ask some questions throughout about your experience working with aging and elderly clients. It's always good to get kind of some examples from people that work in the field. So I really like to hear from you all too. So before we jump into that topic, this is the course platform. I show it every time, but there's always new people, so I want to make sure people know how to use it. You have your little completion tracker at the bottom. You want to make sure you're going through the lessons in order. So you don't want to jump down to Unit 3 and start studying there. You really want to make sure that you're moving in order through the different topics. So you start with getting started. That's going to kind of get your head wrapped around what this test is, what the KSAs are, what you can expect. Then you move into strategy, because before you want to start approaching information, you want to make sure that you have a strategy. So there is where I talk about breaking down questions using the 5 W's. If you are not familiar with the 5 W's, definitely check that out, because we use that a lot as we break down questions. We talk about like certain settings, what you need to think about. You work through the different units. And then if you're ever looking for the study groups, because people are always asking me, where do I find them? You can always go to the search function here. Use this. The search is great. You just type in study groups and you'll see live comes up and past. So that will be where you find that information. Or you can always scroll down. Live's at the bottom. You click it. As you can see, the information's here. Today is Sunday, July 10th. We're doing aging and elderly, and then working with minors will be our next one, closer to the end of the month. So also, here is where the past study groups live. You just click this. You do need to have access to Google to do this. All of our study groups for the year. So even if you just purchased, you have the study groups here for this whole year. And we also have all the 2021 ones as well. So there's tons and tons and tons of stuff for you to view. If you're getting closer to test day, I do suggest spending time in the past study groups, because that's where we cover questions. We kind of do case vignettes, so it will give you really good practice moving forward. Any questions about the platform before we jump into elderly and aging clients? Okay, I'll exit out of this and we will go ahead and start our content for today. So we're going to be covering working with aging and elderly clients, but before we start there, in the chat, any experience that you have, either internship, family members, what comes to mind when I say we're going to be talking about working with elderly and aging clients? Anything, kind of a brain dump? What comes to mind? Have you worked with them? Is this your population? Someone said safety, dementia, adult protective services, exploitation. We're going to cover all of this. Sometimes they are taken advantage of. They're a vulnerable population. Placement, independence, social isolation, hospice, right? End of life care might be something. Self-determination should also come to mind when you're thinking about elderly and aging clients, because I think just as a society, sometimes we think when clients are in that older range that they just have no self-determination, but that's not true at all, right? We'll talk about that today. Loneliness, we'll talk about why that is. We're going to talk about Erickson. So think of that Erickson stage that our clients have, right? You might have had to care for an elderly family member, or maybe you're currently caring for an elderly family member. There's just a lot that goes on at this life stage. Let's see, anything else? Loss of job or not being able to work. Health problems might be coming up, right? Our bodies age as we get older. So that could be something as well too. Physical and mental decline, independence, all of those things. Grief comes in here, right? Clients might be grieving for family members that pass away, or maybe a partner or a spouse is passing away at this time. So lots of different things, but it seems like we have a nice variety of ranges of experience with this population. Okay, so we will go ahead and jump in. And like I said, I'm going to ask you for your thoughts throughout, because I think it's really important. In terms of the chat, never worry about spelling any of that. It's really just to get your thoughts out. It's really kind of like an active participatory thing. So just kind of brain dump into the chat. Totally fine. Don't worry about spelling, just to get your thoughts out. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So we're going to talk about elderly and aging clients and what that might mean for some case vignettes, what that might mean for some case scenarios. So gerontology, in some programs, you can actually study gerontology. Where I went to school, there was a whole track just related to gerontology. So it's actually a very booming part of social work. In the chat, why do you think that gerontology, or working with elderly and aging clients, is on the rise? It's becoming definitely like a topic that there's classes offered on. people are living longer nowadays, right? Baby boomers are aging. The population is getting older. And I think that we're starting to actually research some of the individual and unique needs that this population has, where maybe we were not in the past. And people, like, we have modern medicine, right? We have advances in medicine, advances in science, so people are living longer. And I think we're learning a lot more about what it means to live in this stage, right? And respect right to self-determination and really respect the rights of these clients. So gerontology, it's becoming a very popular field in social work. And someone said here, very important to treat seniors with care and respect, because we know that they can be a vulnerable population. So that's why I think this field is really important. Also, because sometimes I think a lot of people take for granted that they just assume people have family members to help them through this stage, but some people are completely on their own. So they might need our help, our assistance, our advocacy to kind of help them through this stage, because it can be hard if you're isolated and you don't have someone that you feel like can advocate for you. So what gerontology is, it's the study of the biological, cognitive, and psychological factors in the aging process. So kind of think of that biopsychosocial. Gerontology looks at all of that. And gerontology specifically is clients 65 and older. That's for purposes of today, kind of the age range that we're gonna go with, like 60 to 65 and older. So some things that social workers might help people in this population with: working through this cycle of grief, right? The older you get, so you have, people in their 90s, a lot of their friends, a lot of their people that have been in their life start to pass away. There gets to a point where sometimes they're the only one left. So working through the cycle of grief, and think of that just not for the clients that are elderly and aging, think of the families and the systems, right? Because maybe you're working with family members who have lost someone that was an elderly and aging client. So working through the cycle of grief. So some jobs might be working in homes with people, doing home visiting, hospice, end of life care, palliative care, a variety of different things. Connecting clients to support systems. So in the chat, what are some support systems that you think would be important to connect, or wraparound services it'd be important to connect elderly and aging clients with? Support groups, right? Transportation, sometimes that's a huge thing. They can't get to appointments, they can't get to the grocery store. How they're going to get their basic resources, right? How are they going to get to the grocery store? Medication management can be very hard. I know that my grandparents take so many pills that someone has to come, like a family member has to come and make sure that they're taking the right pills because they're on so many different medications. Home care services, home health care. Some people might be getting physical therapy. The social worker might be coming out. So a lot of times if you're going into an elderly or an aging person's home, it's probably going to be a multidisciplinary team, right? They're probably going to be seen by a variety of different people. So just important to note, you probably will not be working on your own. You'll probably have to be talking to case managers, and sometimes nurses come out and check their physical health. So a variety of different things as well. Social activities, that could be a big one, just getting them out because it can be very socially isolating. So maybe connecting them to some things in the community that they can be a part of is part of that as well. We might be helping clients with end of life planning, including their advanced directives. So we want to make sure that clients at this age have a will or know what their wishes would be for end of life. And if something were to happen where they do need end of life, medical attention, what do they want? Do they want to be resuscitated? Do they not want to be resuscitated? This can be a very highly contested area, which is why it's important that we tell our clients to have it in writing before something bad happens. Because there are so many cases, I'm sure you've heard about it in the news, or if you work with this population, family members sometimes don't agree with their parents' directives, right? So then it becomes, well, we don't agree with that. It's not in writing. What do we do? So you want to make sure that whatever their advanced directives are, it's in writing, and that they are in a mental space, in a mental capacity to be able to make those decisions when they're planning for those things, right? Because like we would never want something to happen where they're incapacitated and their wishes aren't respected because they didn't have it down in writing. But if it's not down in writing, we don't have anything to go off of. You might be establishing care plans, right? Like that could mean a variety of different things depending on what's going on for that client. Conflict management with families. This is where it gets tricky. A lot of people and families have competing opinions, right? You might be having family members, children at ends with one another because they just don't agree, right? So, and actually that can be really negative for the client, right? When there's conflict outside of it, maybe they are struggling, they're, really struggling with a terminal illness and their family can't even come to an agreement and they're always arguing. That's not going to be a good situation, right? To have that tension, to have that conflict in the family. So that's, I think, a very common thing, especially end of life, because people deal with that differently, right? It just brings out a lot of emotions in people, for better or for worse. And then we also might provide psychoeducation. That could be to the elderly and aging client, or that could be to their family members, right? If you've never been through this before, you might need some psychoeducation. It's like what I tell new parents, right? If this is your first child, there's a lot of psychoeducation that you need because it's a new experience. So we might be providing psychoeducation to clients and their families as well. Big thing here, I cannot stress this enough. If there's one takeaway you take from tonight's session, we have to respect the right to self-determination. Why do you think with this population it's so important? Go ahead in the chat. Why is self-determination like something we always have to have in the forefront of our minds when we're working with this population? Someone said just a moment ago, sometimes people treat elderly and aging clients like children, right? They just say, oh, they can't make the decision on their own. But that's not the case in many situations, right? So we really want to make sure they still have dignity and they still, that's part of our code of ethics: dignity, respect, self-determination. So we want to make sure that their needs, their voices are still heard. And I think a lot of times what happens is this client population gets persuaded by family members a lot, and they start to feel very helpless. And that also could, or there's some situations they can go either way. Some clients start to physically decline, but mentally they're 100% there, right? And then there's some clients that start to cognitively decline, but physically they're still able to do a lot of things. So it can be really tough. And it can be really hard. What are some psychological things that some of our elderly and aging clients might internalize? What are some feelings that they might have at this stage of life? If you're starting to physically decline, mentally decline, and you probably feel like you're losing a lot of independence, right? Anger, shame. That's, I think, a big one, especially when people can't start to do some of those like daily things like bathing, toileting. There's a lot of shame around that, and asking for help can be really hard. Burden, that's a big thing. I think that I'm glad someone brought that up. I think a lot of times they feel guilty that people might have to step in and help them, even if it's not family members, even if it's hired care, or they're in some sort of facility. I think that can be really hard. You've been independent your whole life and now that's changed. Isolation, right? We've talked about that a lot. There might not be very much mental stimulation, right? If they're kind of just sitting home without activities all day. Denial. That's huge, right? I'm fine. I don't need any help. I don't need any care, but maybe they are, they're either in denial or they're not ready to accept that maybe things are a little bit more serious than they think. So this is a very interesting time in the lifespan. So just important to know some clients might be totally accepting of this life stage, right? It really depends. But I think most people don't like to give up that independence. Someone said driving, right? That's always a big one. They think that they can drive a lot longer than they actually can. And I don't need anyone to drive me. I don't need anyone to do that. So it's just it would be hard for anyone to give up those kind of things that we are so used to doing. So lots of different feelings and internalization of feelings that clients might have. So I'm going to actually put this in green because I think self-determination is so important. If they have the capacity to make decisions independently, we have to respect their wishes. And people always ask me, well, how do you know? There are assessments that you can do, and it will be very clear when a client is not able to make those decisions independently. We would be probably not making that decision. It would be done as a team, usually, like the medical team would. There's a lot of things that go into it too, even medications, how they interact, a variety of different things would go into that. But to the extent possible, we want clients to make their own we want them to practice self-determination and make their own decisions independently to the extent that they're able to, right? If we know that they physically can't drive and they're trying to get in a car, like, we have to protect safety. So always have that in the back of your mind too, that you want to have safety in mind too. We can't let them make decisions that would be harm to themselves or others. So there's different assessments that clients would do. There's like, mental status exams, those type of things as well. They actually have some clients, they do some memory tests as well. There's a variety of different things. Okay, now we're gonna switch gears to Erikson. This stage for Erikson is the final stage, right? That's that integrity versus despair. Final stage of life, it's usually, we say 60 to 65 and up. And this age is where a lot of people are reflecting. They have a whole lifetime under their belt that they're thinking about. So they're thinking about what has gone on in their life. And here's where they're really thinking about, did I fulfill everything I wanted to do? Or are there things that I really regret, or decisions I made that I'm still stuck on, that I wish I could go back to? So integrity versus despair. If you master this stage, those that master this stage, they're going to feel satisfied. They're going to feel that, I lived a very good life. I did the things that I wanted to. And a lot of people that master this stage, they usually feel like at the end of life, they have some sense of peace, right? Like I usually, when people get very, very in their upper, 90s and whatnot, I don't think by then they're like, it's not going to be a surprise that life does not last forever, right? So they've had a lot of time to come to peace with this, the aging process. However, those that, maybe did not feel fulfilled or have a lot of regrets in their life, they're going to look back and feel like fearful, because why would people be fearful at the end of life? In the chat, go ahead and drop that in. Why do you think some people feel like at peace where other people are very fearful? The unknown, right? There's so much unknown about end of life. Scared of actual dying and scared of leaving behind things. I think a lot of time people are like worried about what's going to happen to their families. They might feel that they didn't accomplish things that they wanted to, and maybe they feel it's too late, right? Like, I always wanted to do that and I never did. That might make you feel, a little bit of sense of shame. Some people might not feel they're ready, right? Because that is why we, as social workers, sometimes have to provide psychoeducation on end of life care. Unresolved relationships. You might feel like I never got to come to peace with that relationship that I had. Maybe you had a very strained relationship with a child or a partner, or something like that. So that might be why at this stage, people start to have that sense of fear, that sense of doubt, that sense of regret. But it's important to know to talk about this with your clients, right? You don't have to shy away from it. Ask them how they're feeling about end of life, and meet them where they're at, and understand that it can be very mixed emotions. Some might feel a sense of peace, but also be terrified, right? It can be both sides, I believe, as well. Okay. Before we started chatting, some people definitely put elder abuse as a topic that comes to mind when we're talking about this population. Similarly to abuse with minors and children, elder abuse is a thing that happens, and it's something that we as mandated reporters have to report. There's child protective services for children, and then there's adult protective services for elderly clients and vulnerable clients. So if you are working with a client who's not elderly, but is vulnerable, so maybe that there is some sort of cognitive delay or some sort of situation where they're not able to make decisions independently, if you know that they are also being abused or neglected, we can report that as well if they're over the age of 18. So Adult Protective Services is elders and vulnerable clients. So what is elder abuse? Intentional actions that cause harm. And this would be abuse. So physically abusing someone, mentally abusing someone intentionally, that causes harm to them, or failure to satisfy their basic needs or protect them from harm. So we're going to go to abuse and neglect. I don't have like statistics on this, but I've actually heard elder neglect is more common than elder abuse, because sometimes they don't get checked in on, they're messing up the medicine because they're not, being monitored. They're just in a lot of dangerous things. So we'll talk about elder neglect in a second. Signs of elder abuse, similar to any signs that you would notice of abuse, right? Unusual bruising, that would be uncharacteristic for that person, because sometimes elderly clients do bruise easily depending on medications, but this would be like something outside of the normal. Social isolation, because sometimes it's similar to children. When they're being abused, they kind of go inwards and they don't want to talk to anyone. So they might start to withdraw a little bit, be isolated. Complaints about being treated poorly. I think this is a really important one, because sometimes elderly clients say that they're not being treated well. And what do a lot of people do? Oh, they don't know what they're talking about, or we don't believe them, when they really could be under very unsafe conditions. So if a client complains about being treated poorly, take it seriously and assess. Definitely assess, collect more information. Don't just assume, oh, they're being dramatic, they're being sensitive, those type of things. Depression. Depression is very common amongst this age. We're going to talk about depression versus some other physical symptoms that could look like depression. So it's very important. Also, someone made a very important comment. This does not necessarily have to be a caretaker, maybe in a nursing facility or a nursing home. It can be family members could be treating them poorly, right? I think sometimes family members do fall into maybe being more aggressive with family members because they're very frustrated, right? And without even knowing that, it's getting into that thing where the family member feels unsafe, or it can be poor. Medical decline, that could be a sign of abuse too. Maybe they stop taking their meds, or they stop following up with doctors, those type of things. Those were signs. Remember, that does not necessarily mean they are being abused, but here are some clear examples. If this happens, you have to report to Adult Protective Services. Anytime a client discloses, we have to report, similar with kids. So if a client says my caregiver is hitting me or doing this to me, we have to take that right at face value and report. If they're being physically restrained, unless there is some rare case where this would need to happen, clients should not be physically restrained, right? If they explain this to you, please report to APS. Financial exploitation. So if they say someone, this is very common, right? They are not able to manage their finances anymore. Someone's doing it for them. And guess what? That person's maybe skimming off the top, or pocketing some of that money, or blowing the financials completely, right? And that person now is left with no money to care for themselves. So if a client is telling you that they are being financially exploited, that also would need to be reported. If their caregiver is refusing to allow them to see loved ones or participate in activities, if they're like literally holding this above their head and just saying, no, you cannot do it, everyone needs the chance to have social connections. So if you think it's causing emotional harm to a client, you can report it. And remember, similar to child abuse, we're not there to investigate. We're just there to report what happened. So we call in the information, we give what we have, and from there, Adult Protective Services will follow up. If they're not being provided food or basic essentials, that is necessary. Think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need food to survive. We need shelter. So if a caregiver is not giving them the proper things that they need, we need to report. If they are verbally abusive or berating the person, this actually can be quite common. That is something to report. And then this is like something that's a little bit more rare, but it could happen. You might see something come up like this in a question. If a caregiver takes away prized possession or items of value, what I mean, this is a red flag, right? Because maybe they're selling the item. So I'm thinking like potentially maybe like a ring, a wedding ring or something. And that's that person's most prized possession. And all of a sudden it goes missing or they pawned it off. That's like a red flag. What is going on there? So just things to think about. So that was abuse. Neglect, similar to with children, neglect is not meeting their basic needs, right? They're not getting the attention they need to meet their basic needs. So this would be reportable as well. This, I really want you to pay attention here. This can include self-neglect and the inability to care for oneself. So in the chat, what do you think would be self-neglect of an elderly person? So we know it's they can't care for oneself, but what do you think that would mean? What would be some signs to look for? Not taking their meds, right? Not bathing. These are kind of when you start to see those red flags that, okay, maybe they need more care than they're able to provide independently. And this can be those tough conversations, right? They're not showing up to doctor's appointments. Some people get into hoarding tendencies. Not eating, not bathing, forgetting what day it is, right? Like, so maybe they're becoming disoriented. They're not really understanding time, that type of thing as well. So we can report if we have a client that we know needs more care and they're not meeting it. So that can be a tricky thing to do, but we can report that because at that point, APS is going to need to get involved to provide some sort of support, right? Maybe they can provide some wraparound services. They can connect them with some resources. No food in their fridge, right? Not remembering when the last time they ate, messing up medication, driving when they don't have a license, those type of things. Maybe they forgot to pay the bills and now they have no electricity. They don't have heat. They don't have those access to things. Those are those red flags that it is probably time to get some more resources in there. If an elderly person lives independently but is unable to meet their basic needs, it's considered elder self-neglect. So I just want you to have that in the back of your mind because I think some people forget that for test purposes. We can report elder self-neglect and we should report elder self-neglect. We of course would want to work, assess what's going on, work with them to kind of get those things in. But if we think that the person's a danger to themselves or others, we report. So lack of hygiene, inability to keep and remember medical appointments. As you know, when clients age, they rely on medications a lot more. They have to see doctors a lot more frequently. So failure to take their medications or show up could be a very intense safety situation. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Malnourishment. If you see an elderly client start to lose a lot of weight quickly, that's probably a sign, right? They might need to start to take some supplements to kind of get their weight up. Because why do you think it's really a problem when elderly clients start to get really thin and lose a lot of weight? What physical problems could that cause as elderly clients start to become malnourished? Very, very frail, right? So if they fall, that can be really, they could easily break bones. It's going to be very difficult to do any of those daily living activities. They might start to get delirious, right? Someone said dizziness. There's tons of things that malnourishment can cause. So we want to avoid that at all costs. And also our immune systems get really weak when we're malnourished, right? So they could be very susceptible to illnesses, diseases, all that. If they live in unclean or unsafe living conditions, this is where we start to maybe talk about some of that cleanliness, some of those hoarding behaviors. And then if they're making poor or unsafe judgment choices, like I said, going to drive, but they don't have a license, like that's a big concern, right? They might not be able to operate a vehicle, those type of things. So we want to avoid this for our clients because it's going to actually probably spiral into causing more and more problems for them. We talked about reporting to APS, so I'm not going to read all of this for you, But basically what Adult Protective Services is, typically we can report for elderly clients if the client is 60 or 65 and above. There's some gray area. There's no like right or wrong. And vulnerable adults, we talk about that, those with severe cognitive and physical disabilities. That would probably be in the care of either a facility or has a guardian taking care of them. So just some things to think about if you get question stems that are risk factors for elder abuse and neglect. These does not mean if the client meets this criteria, they're going to be abused or neglected. These are just some risk factors. Decreased functional capacity. So our clients that start to have memory loss, their cognition starts to decline, if they're dependent on other people. So if they can't live alone, if they can't drive, the more dependence they have on other people, the more likely they are at risk for elder abuse and neglect. Why do we think that the less independent they come, the higher the risk for elder abuse or neglect goes up? Why might that be? They already have lost a lot of independence, right? They have a lot of people that they depend on for basic things. So they are most vulnerable, I would say, at this point, right? Just think of if all of a sudden you've had your license your whole life and now you cannot drive and you have to have someone take you everywhere, right? You depend on that person to get from point A to point B. That's a very vulnerable situation that you're in. So the more they depend on people, the more vulnerable they are for elder abuse and neglect because they're losing independence with each of those things. Clients that have problem behaviors that are seen as aggressive, demanding, or complaining, they're at higher risk because why do we think that is? People, if they're being cared for and they're complaining, aggressive, or demanding, they're going to be seen as difficult, right? The caregiver might be very irritated with these behaviors. They might cause a lot of stress or dysfunction. Caregiver burnout, right? They might not be able to, we have to also think about, I'm glad someone brought up caregiver burnout because it's a real thing. And as social workers, we might need to provide psychoeducation on caregiver burnout and what that looks like. It's really a lot of family members will burn themselves out and realize they're getting short with their family members or they're just not able to do it, but they feel guilt for having to maybe hire help or have them go into facility or hire care. Most elder abuse cases are white females. The average age is 77.9 years old. And then oftentimes they live with the abuser. So either it is like in their home, a family member, a caretaker, someone that lives with them, those type of things. They often know the person and the person's often taking care of them. If they're physically, socially, or financially dependent on the abuser, that's a risk factor because what do you do when you're being taken advantage of or abused by someone that you depend on to care for you, right? That's really tricky. What if you don't have options? That's why we need to advocate for clients. We need to report if this is happening because they do have options and we want them to be safe. It doesn't matter if this is your family member, they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And then they may be experiencing dementia or memory loss. So we might be having to do mental health status exams, those type of things, and be monitoring. Also a lot, we'll talk about this in a moment, dementia and depression can look similarly. Also, before we even jump into dementia and depression, what physical ailments might cause some behaviors in clients that we'd want to draw attention to? So what illnesses do we know could maybe cause a client to be acting out, having memory loss? Those UTI, I'm glad everyone said UTI. What kind of symptoms do elderly clients experience when they have UTIs? It's very common for elderly clients to get UTIs. They could get very, very sick, so they're susceptible. It can mimic dementia, right? They can start to hallucinate. They might be very confused. They might be like not seeming that they're in the present. There might be, they might start to display some aggression. some delirium. So it's very important, like with all of our clients, if they're having symptoms that are out of the norm, that we have them check with their doctor, especially elderly clients, right? If they're saying like their sleep is very disrupted, they seem confused. Also, that could not just be a UTI, they could be having a stroke. They could be having so many variety of things. They could be having, I've seen this so many times with my grandparents, medications are not interacting the way they should, right? So maybe they started a new medication and it's causing symptoms, side effects that they didn't want. So there can be so many different things that could be physical with our elderly clients. So anytime that happens, they need to get checked by a doctor because it could be a variety of different things. And we would not want to just assume, oh, it's dementia, they're losing their memory, when it really could have a root that is physical. So just remember that. So if you see terms on the test that are like a client has a UTI or a client has recently been ill in the hospital for 2 weeks and now they're starting to have these things, those type of things. Also, some of their medications might cause side effects as well. Dementia and depression will be the last thing we talk about, and then we'll wrap up with our 3 practice questions. Dementia and depression can often be mistaken. Is it dementia or is it depression? Go ahead in the chat. Tell me some symptoms you would think of for dementia and some symptoms that you would think of if you were treating a client with depression. So memory loss, fatigue, crying, forgetfulness. A lot of the dementia symptoms can actually also be depression, right? Lack of energy, isolation, confusion, brain fog, right? So what the point of this is to basically say you want to make sure you do a thorough assessment for depression and not just assume it's dementia. Or it could be both, or it could be comorbidity. But I think a lot of times elderly clients, we don't, our first thought is, society's first thought is not to say, oh, they're depressed. I don't know why, because depression is very high in this population. So maybe they do need to go through some psychotherapy or get on some medication or find something that's going to work for them. But we don't want to just assume because they're elderly, they're not depressed, right? That does not make sense. We know depression can affect anyone. So for this, it's just basically important that we know that people with depression might start to have memory loss, brain fog, forgetfulness, because those are symptoms of depression. So make sure that you are screening and getting a good, accurate assessment of what's going on. There can also be that relationship. Maybe there's dementia and depression. So it's really important that you work with the doctor, you work with the client's team, you make sure what medication they're on, and that you're really providing that holistic approach for clients. Let's see, a treatment for depression can be effective once diagnosed. So maybe you are like, you know what, everyone's saying this client is experiencing memory loss and dementia, but maybe you as the social worker, because we are experts, right? Doctors might not see this, we might be seeing it. We bring this up with the team. Maybe we start to treat that depression and maybe we start to see some of those symptoms improve. So we're going to want to refer to a medical professional if they're having marked cognitive changes, just to rule out, see what's going on. And we want to be an advocate and kind of let the team, the multidisciplinary team, know this is where you're going to want to get a release of information if it's necessary, like to talk to the doctor, let them know what's going on. Why do you think it can kind of be problematic if we're working with a client, say our client is 83, we think they're depressed, their family members think they're experiencing memory loss or dementia, and we don't get the chance to talk to the doctor? Why would that be problematic if we're not in contact with the doctor, or we're not communicating with the different providers in the client's life? Why is it so important that we would get a release to talk to their medical professionals? Doctors are going to treat from a medical model, right? So they might not know those biopsychosocial factors that are going on. So just like we are not the professionals in medicine, they might not know what's going on, right? They might not know the whole picture as well. And sometimes the patient might not actually be reporting. The patient might think I am getting forgetful, but it could be because it's a symptom of depression. So you just really, it's really a delicate balance at this time. So you just need to coordinate services to make sure that everyone has the whole picture. If you're writing a psychosocial, you want to make sure that it's very detailed. All of the life events, risk factors, those things are going into that. Any questions on that before we jump into practice questions? Someone said, if you believe your client is experiencing symptoms of dementia and you need a release of information, would you want to have them sign it or their caregivers? Depends on how severe. If you don't think they're in the right state of mind to sign that ROI, you got to really just kind of use your clinical judgment to determine if you think they're able to or not. And you can consult with someone if you kind of have questions about that as well. In the best case scenario, they will let their caregiver spouse do that for them, but it gets contentious when they, they're not on the same page as the person that's going to sign it for them. Okay, good questions. Okay, we're going to jump into practice questions. Now we have 3. I'm going to read it. Not important that you get it right. That's awesome if you get it right, but we're more concerned right now in breaking it down. Who's the client? What's going on? How long have symptoms been going on for? Why is the work of a social worker, those 5 W's? We're going to break that down. So first I'm going to read it, and then in the chat, just tell me what is sticking out to you, what's important, and then we'll go through the answer choices and you can put it in the chat. Number 1, an 82-year-old client meets with you for a therapy appointment and reports she is having trouble coming up with the money to pay for her sessions. When the social worker inquires about this, she reports her grown son has been investing her money for the past 6 months, but she no longer has access to any of her bank accounts. She has moved in with her son since losing her home. Her son told her the hardship is due to the stock market not performing well. What should the social worker do next? Before you even answer, what here is important? What do we need to draw attention to? What is clinically coming up for you? Like, what are your clinical impressions? She's 82. Age always matters, right? So she is in that elderly category. There's some sort of financial shift. All of a sudden, financials have changed. She doesn't have money to pay for her sessions. Dependent on the son, right? She lives with him. What do we know about these risk factors? She's dependent on someone and she lives with them. She's lost her home. She lives with the son. He's been investing her money. She can't afford anything and she no longer has access. That's the big thing. That's the red flag for me. She no longer has access. There's nothing. Is there anything in this question stem that indicates to us she is not able to have the right to self-determination and make any decisions on her own? No. So we don't assume because she's 82, her son has the ability to invest her money, to cut off her access to accounts. And he's claiming that it's due to the stock market. But what do we do next? So remember, next questions are, we're going to probably do all of these things at some point with the client, but think of Haslow's hierarchy of needs. What would we do next? A, inform the client that an elder abuse report must be filed due to potential financial exploitation. B, inform the client you will see them on a pro bono reduced fee basis. C, with permission from the client, call the bank to get more information about the client's accounts. D, arrange a meeting with the mother and son to discuss the financial situation further. What answer did you choose and why? So whatever answer you choose, why are you picking what you did? It's a next question, right? And remember, always take the clues you have and say which one best answers the question that we have. All of our flags, all of our question stems here go around possible need for intervention because of financial exploitation, right? There's just too many red flags here. So let's go ahead and eliminate. What would we not do next? Arrange a meeting with the mother and son to discuss the financial situation further. Why would, that's out of the, that is not the correct answer. Why is D not the right answer? Why are we not going to say, okay, let's meet with your son? Has she stated she wants to meet with the son? No. Confidentiality, respecting right to self-determination. This would be an assumption. She has never made any mention of getting the son in there, and the son's not our client, she is. So D is out. Inform the client you will see them on a pro bono / reduced fee basis. You might do that, right? That might be something, but why is that not the next step? Does that address her concerns about her money, you know, being invested, not having access? No, it does not address that issue. We might need to see her on a pro bono or reduced fee basis, but that's not what the question's asking, right? That's kind of a distractor. C, with the permission from the client, call the bank to get more information about her accounts. Would that ever be in our scope of practice to be calling banks and doing financial planning with clients? No. Please don't fall into this trap, because guess who would be liable if something happened, right? Us. We could connect her with people that could help her with that. There's people that do that, but we should not be calling the bank and getting any bank information for the client. So that is out. Process of elimination leads us to A, inform the client that an elder abuse report must be filed due to financial exploitation. Notice here potential. We don't know if she's being financial. Maybe she did lose all of her money in the stock market, but given what the information we have the need to have to report. So A is the correct answer. I don't know what happened there. Someone said, I'm just curious. I thought we don't inform the client that they were reporting. You don't have to, but it's the only question answer that makes sense. So here we go with it because it says we're reporting. But also, why would you maybe want to inform the client in this one? There's some cases where some people, it's just a preference, right? Some people do inform clients when they're reporting, some don't. Why here might you want to tell the client that you are? Trust. You don't want to maybe blindside them, right? And it's in her best interest. You could say that I'm concerned for your safety, so here is what I have to do. Help her address what's going on. You want to maintain the therapeutic relationship. Someone said safety, because what if you didn't tell them, they're blindsided, and then she got some sort of backlash from the son? Maybe she's getting, abused or something. You're disinforming her. You can do that or cannot, but I think in this case, it's in the client's best interest to inform her. Okay, number 2. This is a defense mechanisms question about a client that is an elderly client. So put on your defense mechanism hat. A 76-year-old resident living in an assisted living community explains to her social worker that another resident, who is someone she considers a friend, has become distant and doesn't call her as frequently as before. She expresses anger and sadness towards her friend. The social worker speaks with the fellow resident, who states she continues to reach out to the client and socialize with her at community events. The client also mentions that her adult children do not visit her or call her. She is very sad and lonely due to their distance. What defense mechanism is the client most likely displaying? I'm going to tell you to here, take a moment to kind of read this through, because it's complicated. There's a few different things going on here, so give yourself some time to read it. So we have this resident, she's saying, my friend is distant, she doesn't call me. Friend is saying that's not true. However, her family members aren't calling her or visiting her. This one's tricky, because most of you will get it down to it's either between B or C. So for those of you that put displacement, go ahead and tell me why you think it's displacement. If those of you that put projection, why do you think it's projection? This one is very, very tricky. I will preface it with that. In the chat, why do you think it's displacement? Why do you think it's projected? Okay, we know it's not reaction formation. That's kind of displaying the opposite of what you're actually feeling. And we know it's not a delusion, right? So displacement is always challenging. Projection is always challenging. The correct answer for this one is actually B, displacement. Why do you think that is? Why? Projection would be if you're projecting your own feelings and projecting that to someone else. So maybe I'm really angry and I'm saying that you're actually angry, right? I'm prescribing my feelings onto you. She's not doing that. She's not telling her friend, you're lonely, you're sad, but she's displacing this sadness that she's feeling onto the friend. Does that make sense? She's not prescribing her own feelings to her friend. She's displacing her sadness on to the friend. So that's like the biggest thing. I think displacement and projection can be so hard, but she's displacing the feelings that she's having onto someone else, which can either be an object or a person. She's not projecting her feelings onto them. She's displacing it. Example of projection would be someone tells me that I am not a good worker. They don't think I'm hardworking. Me projecting would say, actually, you're not hardworking. I saw that you took off the last 3 Fridays in a row. I'm not displacing my anger. I'm projecting like that feeling that they just prescribed to me onto them. Does that make sense? Or if I'm very lonely, depressed, I'm like, you know what? I think that you've been showing a lot of depression and loneliness lately. I'm projecting my feelings, prescribing it to them. Where displacement is I'm angry about something that has nothing to do with you, but I'm going to take it out on you, or I'm going to have a reaction that is not meant for you, but it's, you know, we displace our feelings all the time, especially on loved ones. Does that make sense? It can be very tricky, but I think projection, the best way to put it is prescribing the feeling to someone else. Feeling you're feeling, prescribing it to someone else. Displacement, displacing a feeling, sensation, behavior onto someone that has nothing to do with that. Okay, that one's tricky. Last one, number 3. Yeah, someone said displacement is you're mad at work, you come home and you yell at your husband, right? I'm not projecting anything on him. I'm displacing that anger that I have onto my partner. Okay, number 3, an elderly woman is brought to the ER after being struck by a car. The woman was walking by herself at night when she was hit. When paramedics arrived, she had on no shoes, presented with mumbled speech, and said she was looking for her husband. A social worker is called in to meet with the woman. What should the social worker do next when meeting the client? Before you even start answering, what's important here? What information do we have? What are you thinking of? She's in the ER, right? That signals that's the setting, right? She's in the emergency room because she was hit by a car, so safety, right? Being struck by a car is not usually a thing that happens very often. She's elderly. We don't know what that means, but we do know that's probably in that 65 and above age. What other symptoms does this client have? No shoes. Mumbled speech and said she's looking for her husband. We are called in to meet with her. What should we do next? So next means we have her here. What's the next step? Contact the woman's next of kin to inform them of her admission to the hospital. B, report the incident to APS for potential elder self-neglect. C, request a multidisciplinary meeting with the medical team to discuss the next steps for the client's care. Conduct an assessment with the client to assess for further safety and cognitive functioning. What would you do next and why? Give you maybe 15 more seconds and then we'll start eliminating. Okay. So contact her next of kin to inform her of their admission to the hospital. Why is that wrong? Do we have the, release of information to do that? No, right? Like, we can't just start calling up people that are next of kin. We don't know what's going on yet. We don't know what capacity she's at, any of that. So you need to get more information. A is out. Report the incident to APS for potential elder self-neglect. Do we have enough information yet to say that she is a self-neglect case? No, not yet. She might provide us with information that says that, but we don't have, that would be an assumption. We cannot make that determination. So that's out. Request a multidisciplinary meeting with the medical team to discuss the next steps. Do we have enough information to go to the medical team yet? No. We need to talk with the client first. So process of elimination, we're at D. Conduct an assessment with the client to assess for further safety and cognitive functioning. There could be so many reasons why, right? Like, what are some reasons why she could be out struck by a car with no shoes? Like, we could think of a million different reasons, right? Like, we need to figure out what's going on. Was she like, is she in her right state of mind? Is she impaired? Is she under the influence? Was she in danger? Was she running from something? We need to figure out what's going on. So you're gonna definitely want to do a mini mental status exam. You're definitely going to want to collect as much information as possible. And from there, we would do the next step. So from there, we might report to APS, depending on what information we get. We definitely at some point are going to want to meet with the multidisciplinary team. If she is not able to make decisions, we might need to contact the next of kin. So A, B, and C might happen at a later point. But we have no idea. Someone made a really good point. Maybe she was lost and got hit by a car and her shoes flew off, right? Maybe she has mumbled speech because she has some sort of traumatic brain injury. There could be so many things. That being struck by a car is a very, volatile situation. So we don't ever want, this question's just here to show you not to assume anything. We just assess from what we have. We don't make assumptions. We don't jump to conclusions. We don't know what happened. We need to figure out more information. So the best thing to do next would be to get an assessment to assess for safety and cognitive functioning. Safety could be she's not safe because she's, has a traumatic brain injury. It could be a variety of different things. Any questions on that one? Okay. So that is all that we have for tonight. I hope that before we wrap up though, what is one thing that is your takeaway that's going to stick with you from our session tonight? What is something to think about, or something that you're like, after this was a good refresher on this certain point? What is your one, put in the chat, your one takeaway from tonight? Dementia versus depression, someone said. I'm glad that you'll be thinking of that. What are, someone said that displacement versus projection, that's always tricky. That was a very tricky one. Someone said self-determination, risk factors, abuse versus neglect. Not jumping to intervene, assessing first. Safety first. Always think of that hierarchy of needs. If the client's not safe, we need to make sure they are safe. Duty to report when. Lots of different things that people took away. Someone said the UTI, that stuck with me too. Like, I think sometimes we forget about certain physical things can look like depression, can look like delirium, can look like a variety of different things. So this was probably a refresher for most of you, but hopefully now there's some things that are in the front of your mind. If you get a question on the exam, which I'm guessing you will probably get something about a client that is 60 and above. What to expect after this. This is being recorded, so you will get an email with the resources. It will also be up on the study platform under our previous recorded groups. So if you ever want to brush up on this, which I definitely suggest doing, go ahead back and you can review the recording. Our next study group, I believe, is sometime in the 3rd week of July. It's a weeknight. We'll be covering, it's the 21st. We will be covering working with minors. So put your hat on the opposite way. We're going to kind of cover the other end of the spectrum. I hope everyone found something that they could take away from this. I love the study groups. I think they're the most helpful part of the platform. So continue to come. If you have any questions, you know where to email me, agentsofchangeprep@gmail.com. If you're testing soon, good luck. Let me know if you need anything. Sending lots of good vibes your way. Thank you.